Have you ever found yourself punished for telling a truth that everyone else refused to hear? The sting of isolation, the awkward silences, the sideways glances, these arrive not because you lied, but because you refused to. Plato knew that pain well. 24 centuries ago, he watched his teacher Socrates gulp down hemlock for the crime of candor, and from that day, the young philosopher asked a dangerous question. Why does honesty anger people more than deceit? Today, the question still matters. In workplaces, families, and comment sections, bare facts spark more outrage than obvious fabrications. By the end of this journey, you will know why people hate the truth, when silence is wiser than sincerity, and how Plato's darkest insights can keep you safe without selling your soul. But first, we need to step into the darkness you walk through every day without noticing. Have you ever wondered how some people can sit happily inside a comforting lie while you feel it burning a hole in your mouth? They smile, nod, scroll, and keep the illusion alive, but the moment you open your lips with the blunt fact, faces tighten and the air in the room turns thick. Plato painted this scene in the most famous metaphor in Western thought, the allegory of the cave. Picture prisoners shackled from childhood, forced to watch shadows dance across a wall. Those silhouettes are their entire reality. One day, a captive slips loose, stumbles outside, and is blinded by sunlight so bright it feels like knives behind his eyes. That first burst of daylight is truth, overwhelming, disorienting, painful. Now imagine him racing underground to liberate his friends. He tries to explain that the shadows are fakes, that the real world waits outside. Does the crowd cheer his courage? Hardly. They threaten to kill anyone who drags them away from their cherished phantoms. Plato's story feels ancient, but modern neuroscience confirms its pulse. Functional MRI studies reveal that when strongly held beliefs are challenged, the brain's limbic system, the fight-or-flight center, lights up as if under physical attack. Truth registers as violence. That internal alarm is amplified by something even older than philosophy, the social survival code. For prehistoric humans, exile meant death. We are wired to preserve belonging above accuracy, so we instinctively defend the shared story that bonds the group. Break the story, and the tribe treats you like a contagious disease. That is why your colleague shrugs off the accounting error, why your cousin explodes when you mention the family secret, why whistleblowers sleep with one eye open. The cave is crowded because it feels safe. Plato drives the knife deeper. He insists that many people are not merely ignorant, they are actively hostile to enlightenment because knowledge drags responsibility behind it. If you suddenly grasp that the shadows are scripted, you must either leave or become complicit. Most prefer complicity wrapped in comfortable fog. The freed prisoner, meanwhile, discovers a second agony. Language fails him. How do you describe sunlight to someone who has never seen color? His words sound crazy, arrogant, even dangerous. Here lies the first lesson for anyone who prides themselves on just being honest. Truth without empathy is a torch in a straw barn. Before lighting it, you must read the room's oxygen level. Ask yourself, are they ready for brightness, or will the flame consume both of you? Plato is not telling you to lie. He is warning you that facts delivered at the wrong moment feel like an assault. Your motive might be noble, but motives do not muffle the brain's alarm bells. Yet, there is hope inside this bleak picture. The allegory ends with a possibility. Over time, the freed prisoner's eyes adjust, and pleasure replaces pain. The same shift can happen in conversations if you pace the revelation, guiding others from shadow to shape instead of yanking the chains. Socratic questioning, small, open-ended probes, lets minds stretch naturally toward insight. A single, well-timed question can dim the limbic siren long enough for curiosity to slip through. Still, heed Plato's warning. The crowd rarely thanks the messenger. If you decide to champion a disquieting fact, prepare for backlash proportionate to the comfort it threatens. Remember, the cave dwellers have numbers on their side. Courage is essential, strategy is life-saving, And that is why Plato, scarred by his teacher's execution, spent the rest of his life crafting methods to deliver hard truths without following Socrates to an early grave. Yet escaping the cave is only the first step. You have to walk back into the city of Athens and face the people who condemned the last man who spoke too plainly. The next question, then, is obvious. What happens when frank speech collides with political power? Plato witnessed that collision in a packed courtroom, and the verdict still echoes across millennia. But that is not all. Because the bill for honesty can be much higher than exile, sometimes it costs a life. Have you ever noticed that when you speak plainly, people bristle, even if they demanded total honesty only a minute earlier? Socrates lived that contradiction to its fatal extreme. In the spring of 399 BCE, Athens put philosophy itself on trial. The official charges were vague: impiety, corrupting the youth, but the deeper grievance was Socrates' stubborn practice of parrhesia, the ancient Greek virtue of fearless, truth-telling speech. He wandered the agora, interrogating politicians, poets, and generals, stripping their reputations to the bone. They laughed when it suited them, but they never forgot the sting. Plato, 30 years old and fiercely devoted, sat among the spectators. Imagine hearing your mentor refuse every invitation to plead, bargain, or apologize. Socrates could have fled. His friends offered bribes to the guards, safe passage to Thessaly. He stayed, arguing that avoiding the penalty would betray his entire mission to live examined, unafraid, and obedient to his inner daemon. The price, death by hemlock, became his final lesson. Candor without compromise is heroic, but heroism bleeds. For the young Plato, the impact was seismic. He realized that raw honesty, wielded without political awareness, can be suicidal. Athenian democracy had survived war, plague, and tyranny, yet a single relentless questioner unnerved it more than Sparta's spears. The city's leaders did not kill Socrates because he was wrong. They killed him because he was disruptive. If truth destabilizes the delicate stories that hold a society together, the storyteller becomes a threat. That day, Plato's quest shifted from moral purity to strategic wisdom. How to speak truth and survive. Notice the emotional core beneath the philosophy. Socrates loved Athens. He had fought at Delium and served on the council. His frankness was not contempt, but civic duty. Yet the jurors felt humiliated, exposed, smaller, next to his cool certainty. Modern psychologists label that wound status threat. When our standing in a group dips, the brain triggers the same circuits as physical pain. Socrates' cross-examinations inflicted that wound dozens of times a day. Multiply it by years, add public spectators, and you get a city ready to trade justice for relief. Plato preserves Socrates' final defense in the dialogue Apology. Read closely and you'll find a paradox. The man praises frank speech, even as he admits that straightforwardness invites hatred. "I know," he says, "that my plain speaking makes them hate me, and what is their hatred but a proof that I am speaking the truth?" The line dazzles with courage, but also foreshadows disaster. Hatred might prove accuracy, yet it also fuels the poison cup. What actionable wisdom can we extract? First, honesty and persuasion are two different crafts. Socrates mastered the former, ignored the latter, and paid dearly. If your goal is simply to be right, speak as he did, blunt, relentless, indifferent to ego. If your goal is to change minds, study how egos digest criticism. Second, choose your jury. Socrates believed any random 501 citizens could recognize virtue when shown clearly. Plato's life suggests otherwise. The wrong audience will punish insight as insolence. Third, build alliances. Socrates had admirers but no coalition. He was an intellectual street fighter working alone. By contrast, Plato later founded the Academy, a network that protected and multiplied his ideas long after his death. Candor wrapped in community travels farther than candor standing solo. Finally, recognize survival as a philosophical good. Martyrdom has spectacle value but limited strategic payoff. The hemlock killed Socrates in a single hour. It also traumatized Plato for decades. You can honor honesty without worshipping annihilation. The wise learn to measure risk, to scent volatility in the room, to pivot from lecture to question when tempers flare. The image of Socrates' body cooling while the sun set over Athens never left Plato's mind. He began to suspect that words alone were too fragile to bear the heat of politics. Maybe truth needed new armor, myths, metaphors, guarded conversations behind academy walls. Whatever the solution, it would have to tame rhetoric instead of scorning it, because the crowd's appetite for flattery was unstoppable. Plato's first attempt at such armor appears in his dialogue Gorgias, where he attacks the smooth-tongued sophists who sell applause for a fee. There he hints that truth can be medicinal rather than lethal, bitter, yes, but healing when administered with skill. To understand that pivot from combative honesty to strategic care, we need to meet the sophists face to face, and suddenly everything changes. You know someone like this. They flatter everyone in the room, and somehow it works. Promotions, dates, dinner invitations, doors swing open for the smooth talker while the plain speaker waits outside. Plato studied that social alchemy with cold fascination, and he hated it. In his dialogue, Gorgias, he pits Socrates against three celebrity persuaders who teach rhetoric the way modern gurus sell personal branding. Their promise? Master the art of pleasing words, and the world will obey. Socrates calls rhetoric a form of cookery. It tastes good but offers no nourishment. Truth, by contrast, is medicine, often bitter, occasionally painful, but ultimately restorative. The audience, he says, behaves like children craving candy. They reward the chef who sprinkles sugar over poison and boo the physician who sets a broken bone. The insult lands because it still rings true. Look at your social feed. Which posts dominate the algorithm? Hard fact or easy praise? Plato's condemnation is not moralistic scolding. It is a strategic wake-up call. He realizes that people prefer comfort over accuracy 99 times out of 100. If you ignore that ratio, you will lose both influence and, perhaps, your life. So he proposes a compromise. Keep the medicine, but learn to sweeten the rim of the cup, not with lies, but with story, metaphor, and carefully chosen timing. The physician, in other words, must also be a bit of a chef. Here's the practical challenge he poses to you. Before speaking a blunt fact, diagnose whether the listener needs a remedy or a reassurance. Then craft your message accordingly. Example, you notice a friend's self-sabotaging habit. Option 1, the sophist path. Lavish them with compliments and avoid the issue. They stay sick, you stay popular. Option 2, the Socratic hammer. Confront them point blank. They reject you, maybe heal later, maybe not. Option 3, the Platonic blend. Tell a short story about someone who overcame the same flaw, ask gentle questions, and let the friend connect the dots. Same truth, new delivery. Plato provides a famous test for telling whether speech is nourishment or junk food. Ask, does it aim at the soul's long-term health? If it merely inflates short-term ego, it is flattery. This criterion lets you flip a critical lens onto your own communication habits. Scroll through your last 10 messages. How many delivered calories and how many vitamins? But Plato's critique goes deeper. He warns that mass audiences are particularly vulnerable to rhetorical sugar highs. Sophists train politicians to whip crowds into emotional frenzies, promising everything and explaining nothing. Sound familiar? If the allegory of the cave diagnoses our individual reluctance to face hard truth, Gorgias diagnoses the crowd's appetite for performance over policy. The real danger, Plato says, is that a city guided by sweet talk will eventually overdose on its own fantasies. The lesson for your own life is sobering. Honesty alone will not compete with the dopamine rush of flattery. You need technique. That does not mean surrendering to manipulation. It means respecting human psychology enough to package truth in digestible form. Think of storytelling as a Trojan horse. Inside rides the medicine. Let's translate Plato's insight into 3 quick tips you can practice today. First, replace declarations with questions. Instead of, "Your plan is doomed," ask, What risks worry you most about this plan? Questions slip past defensive shields. Second, swap direct labels, lazy, naive, reckless, for descriptive snapshots. Paint a brief scene that shows the behavior's outcome. Let the listener supply the label themselves. Third, puncture praise with a challenge. Complement real strengths, then pivot. Because you're talented, I expect you'll tackle this flaw head-on. Pride becomes fuel for improvement. Socrates ends Gorgias by claiming that it's better to suffer injustice than commit it, better to endure ridicule than speak falsehood. The sophists sneer at him, but Plato lets their laughter hang in the air unanswered. The reader senses that candy will always sell faster than medicine, but cavities come later, and they hurt. Keep that image in mind the next time someone's silver tongue starts massaging your ego. Still, Plato isn't content with diagnosis and tips. He reaches for a larger fix. What if the city could be educated from childhood to crave truth the way athletes crave training pain? That dream leads him into controversial territory, the so-called noble lie, a myth meant to shape civic loyalty. Could a strategically deployed fiction protect society from bigger deceptions? Now imagine if you did the same on a personal scale. Would a small illusion ever be worth preserving bigger truths? Have you ever wished to be someone who could bend reality just enough to keep peace without breaking your integrity? Plato understood that temptation intimately, and he didn't flinch from it. In Book 3 of the Republic, he unveils his most controversial prescription, the noble lie. The idea is simple and unsettling. Suppose you could knit society together with a single story, a harmless fiction that inspires unity, discourages envy, and motivates service. Would that be evil, or would it be compassionate engineering? Plato proposes telling citizens that each soul is mixed with one of three metals: gold for rulers, silver for auxiliaries, bronze for farmers and craftsmen. Nobody can complain about inequality because the gods themselves forged their nature. This myth, says Plato, is necessary medicine for civic harmony. On the surface, it sounds like class propaganda. Peel back a layer and you see a deeper gamble. Honesty about brutal realities might tear the city apart, so a carefully tailored myth becomes a stitched seam holding the social fabric together. Modern ears recoil, propaganda in the name of justice. Yet consider the stories we already accept. National anthems declare unity, most citizens rarely practice. Corporate mission statements preach purpose while chasing profit. Families shield children with tales about Santa or a pet's farm upstate. We swim in noble lies, only we call them traditions or white lies. Plato forces us to ask, are we willing to throw every comforting myth into the fire of truth? And if we do, what rises from the ashes? To grasp his motivation, remember the historical trauma he carried. Athens had executed Socrates, lost a catastrophic war, and endured a brief murderous oligarchy. The city was exhausted, brittle, hungry for soothing narratives. Plato feared that raw honesty about power and inequality would spark civil war. So he chose pragmatism over purity. He carved out moral space for strategic myth-making, but he did it with strict conditions. The lie must serve the collective, not the liar. It must promote virtue, not vanity, and it must remain revisable, not a chain, but a cast removed once the bone heals. There is an implicit warning for you and me. Employ deception sparingly, bind it to ethical checks, and remain aware that every lie, however noble, corrodes credibility. The line between guiding myth and manipulative spin is razor thin. Cross it, and you become the sophist you once despised. Let's test the concept at human scale. You discover a brutal fact about a friend's impending failure. Maybe their startup's finances are doomed. Do you tell the whole truth and watch their morale collapse, or do you frame the problem with hope to buy time for solutions? Plato would ask, which version of the story produces better character and action? If brutal honesty paralyzes them, a tempered narrative might be kinder. But notice, this is not permission to deceive for convenience. It is a responsibility to calculate consequences like a physician deciding dosage. Critics argue that any sanctioned falsehood invites tyranny. History offers grim evidence. Regimes from Caesar's Rome to modern propaganda machines justify oppression with necessary myths. Plato anticipated that objection and insisted that philosopher kings must themselves be trained to love truth more than power. If that sounds idealistic, it is. He knew that any political blueprint is only as good as the people executing it. The noble lie is a high-risk prescription, life-saving if handled by sages, lethal in the grip of cynics. So, where does that leave you? A single voice navigating office politics, family dinners, and digital battlegrounds. Start by distinguishing between convenience lies and virtue lies. The first protect your ego, the second protect shared goods larger than any one person. Use them rarely, declare them temporary, and be ready to retire them when conditions change. Above all, monitor yourself for the moment when the lie becomes easier than the truth. That moment is the border crossing between physician and charlatan. Plato's willingness to trade absolute honesty for social cohesion shocks many modern readers, yet it cements his relevance. He speaks to every leader who has ever wrestled with transparency. Should a president reveal classified threats? Should parents expose children to adult horrors? Should you publish every private doubt online? The philosopher of forms answers with an inconvenient shrug. It depends on the good your words will serve or sabotage. But Plato did not stop at theory. He boarded a ship to Syracuse to test his ideas in the cauldron of real politics, and nearly lost his freedom for the effort. His experiment with truth and power under the tyrant Dionysius would teach him how thin the armor of philosophy really is. Now imagine if you found yourself in the same arena. Have you ever noticed that the hardest truths are not global, but intimate? The ones that hit your paycheck, your marriage, your own reflection? After wrestling with the noble lie, Plato pushes us to narrow the lens. Forget cities and kings for a moment. What do you do when raw honesty threatens the fragile peace inside your daily life? Imagine telling your boss the project is doomed, confessing to a partner that the spark is gone, admitting to yourself that the dream you post online is a mask. Each moment mirrors Plato's gamble in Syracuse. Speak freely and risk exile, or curate words and keep the doors open. The lesson travels straight from the academy to your phone. Truth is not a blunt instrument, but a set of calibrated weights. Too heavy and relationships snap, too light and nothing moves. Plato's final gift is the invitation to balance those scales yourself. He offers no script, only the warning that silence and speech are both moral acts measured by the futures they create. And that realization brings us to the brink of the question that matters most. We began in a shadowy cave where facts felt like violence. We watched Socrates trade breath for honesty, saw sophists sweet-talk crowds into complacency, and traced Plato's daring proposal to steady a city with a carefully placed myth. Across every scene, one thread survives. Truth is powerful because it is dangerous. Handle it without care and it burns. Hide it forever and it rots. Plato's philosophy does not tell you to lie, nor does it command relentless candor. It demands that you respect reality enough to choose your moment, your tone, your audience, knowing that every choice stakes a claim on the world you and others must live in tomorrow. So ask yourself tonight, where and with whom will you adjust the weight of truth so that it heals instead of harms? The answer, like the cave's exit, is yours to walk through, eyes open, no chains, carrying light that can guide or scorch.